Hello, everyone, and congrats for making it another long off season without football. Because here we are. There's a few college football games on. Next weekend, we've got a full slate of college football, and then the NFL's right around the corner. And so we spent our summer not resting. We spent it scouting the next group of players that are going to be entering the NFL draft in 2024. And so we've cooked up of way too early 2024 mock draft. And we're going to preface this by saying that we didn't get into the complications of devising our own draft order. We just took tankathon.com's draft order. So our picks are really based on who we think that team might take, but especially our opinions of those players and how well they're going to fare both this season and the pre-draft process. So without further ado, I think the first pick is rather obvious. The Arizona Cardinals have gotten it, and Kyler Murray's a good quarterback in his own right, but whoever gets the first pick is going to be drafted. Williams. We've got a podcast episode from earlier this summer where we break down his tape at length. So if you want more information on Caleb Williams and what makes him so special, go check that out. But really, it would be a shock if he doesn't go first.
Yeah, I think something, kind of catastrophic would have to happen to, an injury or something like that in order for him to not be going first overall. And I mean, the Tankathon draft order right now has the Cardinals also picking at number 2. And I think, if that was to happen, it makes way too much sense for them to pair their rookie quarterback with a rookie wide receiver who is just so electric and, one of the best wide receivers I've scouted. Kind of hands down. I mean, Marvin Harrison is very, very good wide receiver in my opinion. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have him go very highly, in this case right now, going to the Cardinals.
Yeah, this is the pick the Cardinals acquired from Houston because the Texans moved up in the 2023 NFL draft for Will Anderson. And as you said, Harrison is really generational at the tight end position. There is no player that's built like him, both in terms of physical traits. I mean, he's big, he's strong, he can wall off corners, but he's got the athleticism and the route running ability to get open. And so really you can throw to him when he's covered. You can throw to him when he's open. He's going to make the catch anyway. And even if it's a poorly thrown ball, he's got a ridiculous catch radius and body control to adjust. So he's the real deal. And yeah, I expect him to be the first non-quarterback off the board, honestly. And at 3, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking the quarterback who really is flying under the radar because of all the buzz surrounding Caleb Williams. And that's Drake May. I absolutely love Drake May. I did not think he was going to be as advanced of a quarterback prospect as he is when I turned on his tape. We're talking about one of the most accurate quarterbacks I've ever watched, probably top 3 in that area. And I think the only thing that separates Williams and May is Williams' knack to make an improvisational play that so few quarterbacks in NFL history can make. And I think he's just got that it factor that I'm not saying May doesn't have, but that is really in a league of its own.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in a lot of drafts, May would probably be the top quarterback. I think, Caleb Williams he brings that elite athleticism for the quarterback position. And it's not, because he's the greatest runner or the fastest guy, just his elusiveness and ability to make plays off schedule. But, like you mentioned about May, great accuracy. I think he's got a really good arm. He can deliver the football all 3 levels of the field. So a really, really good quarterback in his own right. The Rams at 4, I think the Rams could have gone a lot of different ways. I think they have a lot of holes on their roster. But to me, Olu Fashanu, the offensive tackle, the best tackle on the board, and I think he would fill a really, really big need for the Rams at number 4. He, to me, would probably be the first tackle off the board next year if all my projections kind of go as I expect. But this is a really good offensive tackle class, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, I was shocked that Fashanu came back to school because despite the fact that he's only started for 1 year, he would have gone in the top 10, maybe even the top 5 of this past draft. And he really has everything when you're talking traits. He's got size, length, athleticism, and he has good technique as well. I think there are minor issues with his anchor, his base width that he could touch up, but just seeing the level that he's at already after just 1 year starting experience is really impressive. And right now on my big board, I actually have Fashanu above Harrison. I think they're both just absolute elite blue chip prospects, and I think I'll take the left tackle over the wide receiver in that scenario. But man, it's splitting hair.
Yeah, and moving down to number 5, talking about another generational talent, Brock Bowers, who I think a lot of people kind of regard him as the best tight end prospect in a while over Kyle Pitts. I have right now, this got me in a little hot water back when we posted our scouting report on Brock Bowers. I still have Pitts over Bowers at the moment. I wouldn't be shocked to see, Bowers have another amazing season and overtake Pitts for the best tight end I've scouted. But I mean, Bowers, great blocker, obviously a great receiver. He is dynamic after the catch to me. Again, not as much as Pitts, but I don't really want to take away too much from him because he is a really, really good draft prospect.
Yeah, Bowers is going to catch everything that's thrown at him, whether he's covered or open. He's got a huge catch radius. He can catch through contact. He's going to dominate other opponents, really, because he's a mismatch nightmare. He's too big for corners to guard him, but he's too fast for linebackers to guard him, and fits into that niche of tight ends that there's so few of in the NFL that are really true chess pieces for offensive coordinators to use. And at 6, we've got Washington taking Dallas Turner. And honestly, I might not be quite as high on Dallas Turner as this mock pick indicates, but I think that he's got elite traits and the possibility of being able to take that next step this year because he's got a great combination of size and speed and bend around the edge. Maybe there's a touch of tightness at the top of his rush that might limit some finishing ability, but for me, it's really about improving his pass rush tools and moves, and if he can do that this year, and then I think he can go as high as this.
Yeah, I think he's a really high upside guy. He's not there yet, in my opinion, as well, but really, really good traits, and especially in that Alabama defense with Nick Saban as a head coach, you kind of expect a lot of these guys to improve year after year after year. Moving on to number 7, the Atlanta Falcons taking Michael Hall, the defensive tackle from Ohio State. He's a guy that I really, really fell in love with watching his tape, and he wasn't even a full-time starter last year. But to me, he's just a game wrecker at that defensive tackle position, and I really expect him to explode on the scene and, really be dominant from the defensive tackle position. And, I could definitely see him ending up as a top 10 pick.
Yeah, he's going to terrorize Big Ten offensive lines this year. Absolutely. I mean, he's got great quickness upfield to threaten as a pass rusher. He combines that with a really nice swim move and relentless motor to get to the quarterback. And what's great about him is despite being a little bit of a smaller guy who's really fast, he still holds up at the point of attack. He disengages from blocks and he excels against the run. And that's really important for me from a smaller defensive tackle. So I'm really a big fan of Michael Hall. At 8, we've got Joe Alt going to the Packers. This looks at offensive tackle like this might be a need, considering David Bakhtiari's situation where he might be on his way out. Zach Tom's a little unproven on the other side of the line. But Alt is another guy who is inexperienced, but his level of play right now is really impressive. He's got height. He's got length. He's got athleticism. I think the one thing I'm looking from him is to improve his anchor because we see him getting walked back into the quarterback a little too often.
Yeah, and an interesting thing to note about Alt is he was kind of a late transition to offensive tackle. So I'm pretty sure in high school he transitioned either his junior or senior year to play offensive tackle. So he's still clearly raw at the tackle position, but the plays that he put on tape with only 3 years of experience to me shows so much upside, and he's a guy that I also really, really like.
Yeah, and then the next guy on this list kind of falls into the same category of being really raw, even more, or maybe not raw, but inexperienced, more so than Alt even, because although he's been playing tackle for a while, he's at Georgia with that really talented offensive line, and that's Amarius Mims, who sat behind Broderick Jones and Warren McClendon last year, with the exception of most of the LSU game in the regular season, and then both college football playoff games once Warren McClendon went down. And he shined and showed a ridiculous skill set with his size, his power, his athleticism. There's a couple technical points, especially his tendency to kind of push his opponent rather than latching onto him and sustaining his block. But I mean, looking at what Broderick Jones did in his first year as starter and ending up going in the top 15, I think Mims has an even better set of traits, and that's why I think it's fair to project him even higher despite the inexperience.
Yeah, and rounding out our top 10, we have the Chicago Bears. I'm pretty sure this is their pick from the Panthers.
Yeah.
We have them picking Jared Verse, the defensive end from FSU, and he's a guy, I think a lot of these defensive ends this year can kind of be in the category of really raw with high upside and a lot of traits. To me, Jared Verse is another one of those guys. He's really quick off the ball. I just found that he kind of struggled a little bit generating some counter moves when his first pass rush move didn't work against more experienced offensive tackles. But another guy that I could see improving in his expected final season in college football.
Yeah, I think that's a good analysis of him. And moving on to the 11th pick, here we've got the Raiders selecting J.J. McCarthy. And this requires a little bit of a leap of faith, but I like what I've seen on tape from J.J. McCarthy so far. He's got a great arm strength. He's a tough player. He reads the field pretty well, which is what I find really promising for him. I think he shows good flashes of accuracy and ball placement. You just want to see that more consistently because his mechanics can get sloppy at times, and that's really going to be the point of emphasis for him this year. And I think that if he can take a step forward there, he can definitely come off the board rather early. And right now, he's my QB3 because I just haven't seen anyone else emerge. And so I think he's pretty solidly in that third spot, well behind May or Williams and May, but a chunk ahead of the other three quarterbacks we scattered, who we can talk about a bit later.
Yeah, and at number 12, this is the Bears' own pick. We have them taking the first cornerback off the board, Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. I think we're both a little bit lower on Kool-Aid than kind of the rest of the scouting community right now. To me, I think he's really handsy and really grabby, and that's going to get him into some trouble at the NFL level. I think he moves pretty well covering receivers. I think he can cover guys downfield, but just I saw a lot of either penalties or plays that I would expect to be penalties at the NFL level. And to me, that just kind of bumps him down a little bit. So 12's a little bit rich for me right now. But again, Alabama defensive backs have time and time again shown to be productive and long-term NFL players.
Yeah, he reminds me of Keely Ringo last year, who heading into the season was consistently given top 10, top 15 selections in mock drafts, and I just couldn't see it. And it's kind of similar where he really does have great size and length. He breaks up passes. He's physical, and if he can crowd a receiver to the sideline, he's going to be able to win that play. But I see not only the handsiness that you mentioned, but he struggles to mirror really sudden receivers and sharp movements because he's got some hip tightness. His reactive athleticism isn't as good as I'd like. And that is overall a pretty similar profile to Keely Ringo. So I wonder if his play will fall off and he'll end up going later in the draft like Ringo, or because of his pedigree as a multi-year, still like productive, good SEC starter for Alabama, and given the track record of Bama cornerbacks, whether he'll go this high. So we'll see, but that'll be interesting. And at 13, we've got the Denver Broncos taking the first wide receiver off the board. Jerry Jeudy's been hurt pretty often. Cortland Sutton has been shopped like Jeudy. And so it makes sense that maybe the Broncos will be looking to go wide receiver. And that here is Egbuka, who is not my wide receiver one right now, but is such a safe pick. He's really got the kind of the knack of just being reliable and getting open that we've seen from a lot of Ohio State wide receivers, and their success recently, like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, I think could drive him off up boards.
Yeah, to me, he's a really good route runner. Honestly, a really safe pick. I just kind of want to clarify a little bit. Obviously, he's the second wide receiver off the board.
Oh yeah,
Marvin Harrison came off at
yeah.
second overall, but I mean, he's not at least my second receiver either. But it just like you mentioned, with the success of Ohio State receivers, it would make a lot of sense to see these guys continue to get pushed up. Um, and I think I think he deserves to be in the top 32 picks right now, but 13 again might be a little bit rich for me.
Yeah, Michael Harrison
Moving,
is just in a league of his own. That to me in my head, it's like, okay, who's like wide receiver 2 behind him that it slipped my mind
yeah,
that he's even
yep.
there.
Moving on to number 14 now, the New England Patriots. So they're picking another offensive tackle, J.C. Latham. He's a guy to me really moves really well, quick, agile, and the one thing that kind of gets me is I feel like he falls off his blocks a little bit in the run game. Um, but the movement ability, his ability in the pass game, uh, to me really warrants a first round pick for me.
I saw him a little bit differently than you did. I thought that maybe he wasn't super athletic, still above average for sure, but that what really stood out to me was the size, the power, just the ability to latch onto a defensive lineman and control him through the rep, and just that pedigree at Bama of being a really solid starter. I think he's technically sound, and he's talking about the Patriots, their love for big linemen, Alabama players, and their need at offensive tackle that's going to become really, really obvious as the 2023 season goes on. This makes perfect sense. And now moving on to 15, Steelers here making an interesting pick with Mason Smith, who is a guy that, you could see in the top 10, or you could see not getting drafted or maybe going back to school, because he's only played half a season of football. So it's a big risk putting him this high, but the traits are so special and the flashes that we've seen are really make you think that if he can stay healthy and play this whole year, he could end up going this high, if not even higher.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, the tape that he's put up is great. It's just 2 season-ending injuries for me is a little bit concerning.
Yeah.
But if he comes back, plays really well, and stays healthy in 2023, you can definitely see why he would end up being that first-round pick. And the Steelers love adding to that defensive line, like to have a deep rotation, and they're honestly a little bit. I don't want to say weak, but they don't have a lot of depth on the defensive line, and Cam Hayward could be a guy that is probably on the way out within the next 2 or 3 years. Moving on to number 16 now, the Minnesota Vikings taking Braylon Trice. I'm pretty sure the Vikings had one of the worst, if not the worst, defenses last year. So to me, it really made sense to put any defensive player to the Minnesota Vikings. Another defensive end that's talented, but high upside, still has a little bit to develop. He's again athletic. He's got really long arms and great play strength. Would just like to see him get a little bit better with some counter moves and things like that. But again, a guy that could move up, into the top half of the first round, or if he doesn't develop like we'd expect, maybe go into the back of round 1 or into round 2.
At 17, we've got the Houston Texans reinforcing that wide receiver group that's really below average right now in the NFL, and taking my current wide receiver too, Malik Neighbors, who I think really does everything well. I mean, he's maybe not the biggest, maybe not the fastest, but he's still big enough. He's fast enough, definitely well above average in both those categories. He gets open with good routes. He's got hand strength to create space for him at the catch point. He catches through contact. I think really all you can reproach him is that he may not be elite in any category. So you're not going to take him in the top 10 because he doesn't have the same potential that, for example, a Jamar Chase did coming out. But I really like him right now. Just want him to stay out of trouble. There was that arrest recently in New Orleans where he was carrying a gun. So just stay out of trouble. And I think Malik Neighbors is a surefire first round pick.
Yeah, at 18, we have the Chargers taking Kalen King, the corner from Penn State. To me, there were things on his tape that I really, really liked. He's super physical. He's super involved in the run game. I just kind of struggled to see the deep speed. To me, was a little bit lacking. He got beat deeper by quicker receivers that could really make those sharp cuts. I felt like his hips might have been a little bit tight, a little trouble mirroring some of those guys. But I loved the physicality with both the wide receiver at the line of scrimmage, and then his willingness to make tackles in the run game. Uh, so again, I think a guy that probably ends up in the first round. But I think if he continues to get beat deep a little bit and doesn't improve on some of those things, might end up falling out of that first round.
At 19, we've got the Saints going wide receiver as well, because if you look at that wide receiver room, Chris Olave is the bright spot, but Michael Thomas has not been able to stay on the field. And it's just looks like Rashid Shaheed and Traquan Smith are filling out those wide receiver 3 and 4 spots. So that's just not talented enough, honestly. And I think Xavier Worthy would add a lot of talent in that wide receiver group. He is electric. I mean, the quickness, the suddenness, the speed. He's just a big play threat. And I know that he's undersized, and that's going to limit him in certain areas. He might not be able to outmuscle an opponent, and he sometimes can get crowded by the cornerback. But I really was impressed by his ability to expand his catch radius, because he has such good leaping ability for someone of his size. And I also found that he can catch through contact better than a lot of receivers his size. So despite the size limitations, I think he could be one of those smaller, shiftier, fast wide receivers who does manage to make that transition to the NFL.
Yeah, at number 20, we have Christian Mahogany, offensive guard from BC, and he's a guy that we actually had the opportunity to interview a little while ago. He unfortunately suffered a season-ending injury last year, ended up coming back to school, but we really, really love this tape. He's a really strong, powerful offensive lineman in the run game, and he's definitely a guy, assuming he stays healthy this year, puts on tape that he put on, what was it, 2 years ago? Definitely a guy that we could see end up in the first round.
Absolutely. I mean, he was a really great guy to talk to, super focused, also very academically motivated, which really just shows you sometimes that that's someone you can really rely on to be a hard worker in your organization. And what I've really liked about him on tape is, as you said, the power, but then also the athleticism, the technique. I really saw a total package there. And honestly, I found that he was a better prospect going into his final, what we thought was going to be his final season last year before he suffered the ACL tear in the summer, than a former Boston College offensive guard, Zion Johnson, who ended up going 17th overall to the Chargers. I could see Mahogany going in that same range because he's just such a talented player. And at 21, we've got another guy who I think is really going to surprise people potentially in the NFL, because maybe he doesn't wow you with physical traits, especially athleticism, but JT Tuimoloau is a really powerful player who plays with his hair on fire. And just thinking about him as a prospect beforehand, I was reminded of Talanoa Hufanga, where when I list out the traits, I'm thinking, oh, am I too high on him? But it's just that gut feeling of watching him play and knowing that he's a good football player. He's got an extremely high football IQ, and he just makes plays. So I think sometimes you just have to trust that and not get too much into the nitty-gritty analysis bit. And if you just are impressed by the football player, seeing the effort, the intelligence, you just trust yourself that that guy is going to be able to be successful in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it, because like you mentioned, his notes, his scouting notes don't jump off the page, but just he's a guy that you have to watch play to see how impressive he is and how many plays he made for that Ohio State defense. So rounding out with the last 11 picks, at 22, we have the Miami Dolphins taking Christian Haynes, an interior offensive lineman from UConn. So this is pretty cool for us. We're both UConn students, but we didn't really let that influence our decision at all, because Haynes is a really good player in his own right. He's extremely strong and powerful in the run game. He really has a nasty mean streak, and he's got a ton of versatility. He played guard last year, is moving inside to center this year. We know teams really value the versatility aspect, especially for an offensive lineman. So he's a guy that could definitely improve the Dolphins' offensive line at guard or center.
Yeah, he played guard the last few years, but will be transitioning to center this year. So showing off that three position versatility across the three interior O line spots is going to be really important. Look for him to have a really strong Senior Bowl as well, where he may answer some questions about competition level, given that UConn's schedule is now super tough. Although he will have a couple opportunities starting next Thursday against NC State to put on quality tape against good opponents. I like Haynes. I think he's really flying under the radar because of the helmet on his head, and that UConn has struggled in recent years, but he's a good player. At 23, we've got Cooper DeJean, a defensive back from Iowa. 24, we've got Leonard Taylor, D tackle from Miami. Then 25, we got Jerzon Newton, a D tackle from Illinois, who I think is pretty similar to Kalijah Cansey in that he's really athletic and has pass rush potential, but to me, he just gets washed out too often in the run game for me to warrant a first round selection. But seeing where Cansey went, 19th to the Bucks, I think it's fair to expect Newton to be a first round pick as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Rounding out the first round, 26 to the Baltimore Ravens, we have Chop Robinson. 27 to the Dallas Cowboys, Jeremiah Trotter, linebacker from Clemson. 28, Rome Odunze, the wide receiver from Washington. At 29, the 49ers, Cooper Beebe, the offensive lineman from K-State. At 30, we have Jatavion Sanders, the tight end from Texas. So, to me, Sanders looks a little bit I would have him in the second round right now. I know you're a little bit bigger of a fan of him than I am, so why don't you talk about him a little bit so you can let everybody know what we think.
Yeah, I don't quite have a first round grade on him, but to me, he's a tight end who's going to come into the league a little raw and might not contribute too much early, but kind of like Dallas Goedert and Evan Engram, I would expect him to maybe 3-4 years into his career really take that next step and potentially become a top 10 tight end in the NFL. I mean, it's going to take some development. To me, first of all, he's kind of like a big receiver where he's really skilled at walling off whatever defender is tasked with guarding him, can catch through contact. He can high point the ball on jump balls. And he's also athletic, but he's not really asked to use his athleticism to get open in terms of running a diverse route tree. And so that's where I think there's going to be a big learning curve in the NFL. Kind of the same thing when he's with his blocking, where he blocks well downfield, but he's got the size to block inline, but Texas doesn't really ask him to. So that's also something he's going to have to learn. So that's why I just don't think he's going to contribute too much early on in his career. So a first round pick would be a little too rich, especially for teams picking in the back end and who might be expecting instant contributions to make a Super Bowl run. But I think the Bengals would need a tight end. He could elevate their offense, and they can be a little patient with him. They've got a young core and a window for the Super Bowl that isn't closing anytime soon. So I think he would make some sense for them.
Yeah, and then rounding out our last two picks, the Philadelphia Eagles, Kamari Lassiter, the cornerback from Georgia, and then at 32, the Kansas City Chiefs, Ruka Horahoro, the defensive tackle from Clemson. So that is our first round mock draft. You can check it out on Instagram. We also have our preseason top 25 out. Mm-hmm. And really quickly before we wrap up, do we want to talk about the quarterbacks that we've scouted for a couple minutes? I know we talked about the top three. Why don't we talk about the guys that we have at 4, 5, and 6?
Yeah, let's talk about the quarterbacks and then a quick note on the running backs as well, who might not be, good enough, especially with positional value to crack this first round in our big board, but are an interesting conversation as well. But let's start with the quarterbacks. The other three quarterbacks that we drafted or that we scouted were Quinn Ewers from Texas, Michael Penix from Washington, and Bo Nix from Oregon. And I was really underwhelmed by all three of them, honestly. To me, Ewers is wildly inaccurate. I was really expecting more from him in that regard, and that's just the most important trait for a quarterback. But I think it's correctable. He's got some quality traits, especially arm strength. What gives me some hope is that I think his processing is pretty good for his level of inexperience. Like, he reads the field well, he senses pressure well. You just have to really be able to work up that accuracy.
Yeah, I really kind of struggled with yours a little bit. To me, the play, like you mentioned, was all over the place. And I did see processing at times, but there were also some games and definitely some plays where I felt like he was either staring down the first receiver or was taking way too long to progress through his reads. So it just seems really, really inconsistent to me. And then there was this whole conversation about him possibly losing the starting job this year. Not sure if he's going to have a short leash at Texas. So it's really hard for me to see him, right now anything above kind of a 6th-round pick. And to me, that's kind of drafting him with, the hope that he'll play better in the NFL than he did in college. We see that from time to time. A guy like Brock Purdy, for example. I have Michael Penix as my 4th quarterback, a 4th-round grade on him. To me, the athleticism is clearly there to be a playmaker at the quarterback position. And I think he's got good arm strength, but, I think his mechanics to me are extremely inconsistent. And he's a guy that's played a lot of football. I think it's been at least 4 years as a starter. And he's had at least 3 season-ending injuries while a starting quarterback. So that was really what concerned me quite a bit. And, that's something that's really tough to get over for a quarterback, between inconsistent mechanics that have been like that for a long time, and then 3 season-ending injuries, especially lower body injuries.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm concerned with the injuries, and really what keeps him behind Ewers for me is that inconsistency with his mechanics and his accuracy as a result comes despite 5 years, if I believe, of starting experience thus far. So I think it's just less likely that he's going to improve in that regard than someone like Ewers. And it's kind of similar with Bo Nix. I think his main weakness is different. For me, it's the fact that he struggles reading the field and processing. He's good. He's just mainly a one-read guy, where he's going to lock on to his first target. If his first target's not open, he's either going to resort to his check down rather than scanning for a second, third option downfield, or he's going to tuck and run it or try to escape the pocket and make a throw out of structure. So that's I think not translatable at all to the NFL. And I will give credit to him that he played better at Oregon than the last couple of seasons in Auburn. He managed to cut down on some of the hero plays that were just a little too much and got him in trouble at times, and became a good starting quarterback in the Pac-12 and in college football. But I just don't really see him translating to an NFL starter. And overall, I am pretty low on this group of Ewers, Penix, and Nix.
Yeah, I feel like for me, especially for Penix and Nix, it's going to be hard to see them make a huge jump up my board, just because of, a history of 4 or 5 years of consistent inconsistency.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, if it's been a trend for that long, I find it hard to believe that they're going to all of a sudden buck that trend, either, their final season college or at the NFL level.
Yep. Let's switch over to the running backs just for a quick second, because we scouted a few of them. None of them made that first round mock, like I said. But to me, my top running back, and he's your top running back as well, is Donovan Edwards, actually, who doesn't start on his own team. But to me, at Michigan, he's behind a really good running back in the first place in Blake Corum. So I don't really hold that against him, but he's really well-rounded. He's got solid power, solid contact balance, really good vision, solid burst. He's just not all that special, which is going to make him pretty replaceable in the NFL. So I see like a low-end starter, high-end backup with him.
Yeah, I think, I agree. Like you mentioned, he's my my first running back off the board. To talk about Blake Corum, the other Michigan running back, really quickly, I was, a little bit confused to see him return. I understand he had the injury. There's unfinished business at Michigan. But I feel like, from what we heard, his draft stock might have been a little bit higher than it may end up being this year. I'm concerned that he may end up being relegated to, the running back 2 role. While I'd assume they both get a ton of carries, and their play styles a little bit differently. I think Corum's a little bit scrappier, is probably a little bit better for those short yardage. He drives his legs really well, and can push the pile. But to me, I feel like, a late day 2 guy, possibly a day 3 guy, especially if he gets relegated down to the running back 2 role.
Yeah, I think that they're going to split carries rather similarly to last year. And even if it's a little more in Edwards' favor, honestly, that helps Corum as an NFL draft prospect, because if he were to get the exact same workload, he would come out with a high number of carries in his career, which is not correlated to long-term NFL success for running backs. But I found him so fun to watch. That doesn't mean that I'm over the moon about him as an NFL draft prospect. I see a third rounder, but to me, I saw him a little differently than you actually. He might be scrappier, but he's a smaller running back, so he's not that powerful, and I don't really think he's a guy that you're going to expect to push the pile or excel at the goal line. But what he does great is, one, the vision, just being able to tiptoe behind the offensive line, dash through whatever gap is available, because he is a smaller runner, so he can really tiptoe or skinny himself into any hole. And then he's got a really nice burst, really good cutting ability. So I like him as, a change of pace guy, like kind of like Edwards, low RB1, high RB2. That's what I see in him. Just to touch quickly on a couple other guys that we scouted. Travion Henderson for me was a guy that I don't really see as a surefire NFL starter, despite kind of the reputation that he's had as someone who's been performing since his freshman year at Ohio State. To me, he's got really nice burst, but just not that powerful, and he can get tripped up at first contact pretty quickly. And then the other guy that we scouted was Raheem Sanders. And to me, I think it's just kind of funny because his nickname's Rocket, and this is kind of a trend now of nicknames being really misleading for NFL draft prospects, because Tank Dell was the smallest receiver in the draft last year, but nicknamed Tank. Tank Bigsby is, not that small, but I'd say he's quicker than he is more powerful. And so now we've got Rocket Sanders, who isn't that fast, is actually a converted wide receiver. And he's a really unique prospect, honestly. I had a tough time evaluating him, but I'm not a big fan of his upright running style. I don't think it lends itself to maximum yardage on each carry. It can lead to durability issues, but he definitely is a weapon out of the backfield with that receiver back.
Yeah, he was utilized, in a unique way at Arkansas. He was moved all around the offense. He was in motion. He was lined up in the slot. And normally when you see that happen with guys, especially running backs, you expect him to be on the smaller side. And he's I think he was listed at 235 pounds.
Yeah.
So he is a bulldozer. I think he has decent contact balance, but like you mentioned, he lacks, great speed. And, to me, it's not really a sustainable NFL starting running back. I can see him as a RB2 and can kind of be utilized in some unique ways like he is being used right now at Arkansas.
Yeah, overall, this is a really weak running back class, at least from the guys that we scouted. So I wonder if they're going to stay the top crop or if we're going to see other guys emerge. And I would say the latter. Maybe Edwards and Corum are going to stay in that top tier, but I expect a couple other guys to break out, and for someone that we didn't even mention to go in like the second round, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's probably more likely because a guy that we're not expecting probably hasn't gotten a lot of touches so far.
Yeah.
And that's going to make him even more more liked in the scouting community because of that limited tread on the tires coming into the NFL.
Yep, absolutely. So there you have it. There's our mock draft. And again, make sure to check out the big board on our Instagram as well. We've got a few last scouting reports to put up this week, so that's going to be exciting. A good variety of offensive, defensive players to close out before most programs kickstart their seasons next Saturday. It's going to be a fun season in both the NFL and in college football, and I just can't wait to see how this evolves, because, very often you look back to prior to the season and you're like, wow, some of these guys are still going that high, but wow, some of these guys returned to school or went way later in the draft, and so many guys we didn't even mention are going to be getting first round consideration next year. So it's going to be fun to see how all the draft stocks of all these players evolve.
Oh yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode soon.